Operation Epic Fury has been a brutal wake-up call for an Iranian regime that thought it had it all figured out when it came to defending itself against an attack. But watching from afar is Russian President Vladimir Putin, and he's terrified. Putin never expected any of this to happen, and now he's racked with fear because he has been forced to ask himself a very uncomfortable question. If the US did this to Iran, could Russia be next? In a March 5th video, the Kyiv Post said that this is the question that is reverberating around the Kremlin right now, as Russia is coming to terms with watching as the US pulls off something in Iran that Putin never thought was possible. Former Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is dead, along with dozens of his underlings. That should have been impossible. Khamenei's underground bunkers were supposed to shield him, yet he died one day into Operation Epic Fury. Putin will have taken notice of that because it shows Russia's leader that he isn't safe, as we'll discuss in a few minutes. However, Putin is also devastated by the loss of Khamenei for another reason. Another of his allies is down. And the shrinking pool of what he has left isn't enough to maintain Russia's position as a global geopolitical player. Russia is having to watch as the US dismantles a regime that has proven vital to Russia, not only in the Ukraine war but in terms of Putin's power projection and his influence in the Middle East. And right now we're watching as the rhetoric that's emerging out of Russia gets increasingly desperate. The perfect example comes from Olga Skabayeva, who the Kyiv Post says is a mainstay on Russian television, which essentially makes her yet another Kremlin mouthpiece. According to Skabayeva, America's actions in Iran are a violation of all human morality. It's rich coming from Russia, a country that launched an illegal invasion of its neighbor for no other reason than because Putin wanted more territory, is now trying to point an accusatory finger at the US. Putin doesn't care about morality. What he cares about is how Russia is being hurt badly right now, and how what is happening in Iran could be a portent of what's to come for Russia. Still, Russia is following up on the rhetoric. On March 11th, the Washington Post reported on claims out of the Kremlin that Russia can no longer trust the US in Ukraine war negotiations. Russian foreign policy analyst Fyodor Lukyanov sums up the collective Russian mood when he asks the question, how can negotiations even be conducted in such a situation if you know that any moment the other side may shift to a direct personal attack against you? How indeed. Perhaps this was all part of the US plan. After all, we're starting to see a pattern emerge in how Donald Trump's administration handles its enemies. That pattern emerged at the start of 2026 with the ousting of Nicolas Maduro. The US made overtures about negotiating only to go in like a shot to extract Maduro from Venezuela. Similarly with Iran, the US tried to negotiate over a nuclear deal, but it ended up attacking and eliminating Khamenei. What we may be seeing here is that the US uses negotiations to buy time to prepare. When it's ready, the US strikes, as it has in Venezuela and Iran. Putin may be seeing parallels, albeit over a much larger timescale. It's these parallels that create the fear, along with the damage that the Iran war is causing to Russia right now. We'll cover the second of those losses later, so stick with us until then. But on the fear front, there are a lot of reasons why the brutal wake-up call Putin has received while watching what the US is doing in Iran will have shaken him up. For one, the US showed that it could eliminate an entire leadership structure in a matter of days, and it doesn't even matter how hard those leaders try to hide. Khamenei is dead. By March 6th, Sky News was reporting on Israeli claims that 40 of Iran's top military commanders were also eliminated during the initial airstrikes against Iran. Those included Iran's defense minister and its armed forces chief of staff, along with the leader of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Major General Mohammad Pakpour. As Estonian military blogger Artur Ray points out, the US and Israel even eliminated the temporary Ayatollah, who was put in place to replace Ali Khamenei. That happened within a day of the appointment. This is the most dangerous position in the world right now, Ray says, adding, they will hunt them down like rabbits when it comes to whoever Iran puts in Khamenei's former position. Right now it seems that the US is holding fire when it comes to Mojtaba Khamenei, perhaps to see what position he's going to take. But it has already been made abundantly clear that the US and Israel know where Iran's leaders are and have the capability to hit them. That's what has Putin feeling so afraid. He doesn't really care about the military and political heads that the US and Israel have taken out. What he does care about is that Ali Khamenei and his temporary replacement were both eliminated, seemingly at will, by the US. What this tells Putin is the US has both the intelligence and the means to strike leaders who actively go out of their way to hide. That's not exactly great for a Russian president who has his own secret underground lair under his Gelendzhik palace. The diagrams have even been posted for that palace's bunkers, The Telegraph reported in May 2023. So that amounts to a hiding place taken away from Putin. Not that it would matter. If the US can pull off in Russia what it managed in Iran, there would be nowhere for Putin to hide. Russia's president knows it. So what the US and Israel did to Iran's leaders has put Putin in a position where he will always be looking over his shoulder for the other shoe to drop when he deals with the US. Putin's fear is being compounded by the fact that what's happening in Iran has exposed Russia's military weakness. Let me remind you that Russia signed a mutual strategic partnership pact with Iran, also with Venezuela, Ray says, calling the pact pretty much a NATO Article 5 thing that should have led Russia to providing Iran with direct help in response to an attack on its own sovereignty. That help hasn't come. We can quibble about the true nature of this pact, as it's been labelled a cooperation document that followed on from the signing of a strategic partnership by others, but the nature of the agreement still carries some weight. It set Iran out as an ally that Putin would want to protect, but Russia has done nothing to help militarily, instead restricting itself to providing some intelligence and hypocritically complaining about what the US is doing. This isn't a strategic decision for Putin. It's a necessity because Russia's leader knows that his country doesn't have the firepower needed to insert itself into the crisis. That's especially the case now that the Ukraine war has drained Russia's military so substantially. Putin will have to be wondering what Russia's shrinking cadre of allies must be thinking, as they note his complete failure to help Iran's faltering regime. They've watched as Maduro and Khamenei fell, along with Syria's Bashar al-Assad not so long ago, with barely a whimper out of Putin. As Wes O'Donnell puts it, what's happening in Iran has confirmed Putin's approach to his allies, which is that Russia's offers of protection, weapons, and the promise of keeping enemies away has utterly failed. Outside of China, which certainly isn't dependent on Russia for any sort of protection, Syria, Venezuela, and Iran were among the real heavy hitters when it comes to Russia's allies. Putin did nothing for any of them, so smaller countries that may have thought they could rely on Russia for aid in their time of need may now be thinking twice about allowing Putin to spread his influence when they get nothing in return. The network of allies is shrinking for Putin, which is just as scary as the prospect of the US being able to hit him at any time. Then there's what Putin has seen in Iran so far. As of March 11th, the US claims that it has struck 5,500 targets in Iran. Bear in mind that this doesn't mean it's launched 5,500 missiles and bombs. That number will be much higher, as several of these 5,500 targets will have been hit multiple times. Iran's navy has been crippled, so has its air force and its entire leadership structure. Israel now claims that 80% of Iran's air defense network was gone as early as March 5th, and that will worry Putin because Iran's air defenses included Russian systems such as the S-400. They failed to do anything about America's aerial assault, which is likely an indicator of how those defenses would fare if America launched a similar kind of attack in Russia. This all adds up to Putin watching as the US took out a leader that it shouldn't have been able to hit, stripped Russia of a key ally, and demonstrated its utter superiority on the aerial front, both against Iran and to a version of Russia that keeps its fighter jets out of Ukraine because they're not able to handle the heat. Putin is scared because he sees the blueprint of his own downfall in the Iran. Should the US ever decide that it's about time to stop talking and start taking action against Russia? And here's the worst part for Putin, this just covers what might lie in his future. What the US is doing in Iran is hurting Russia badly right now, and there's nothing that Putin can do to stop it. And this is exactly the kind of thing that we cover at the Military Show. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time, if you're interested in seeing how power really moves on the global scale. Speaking of power, Putin has a lot less of it right now than he has had perhaps at any point during his 2.5 decades reign in Russian politics. We've seen that in the loss of allies, which Chatham House explains is already on the verge of having far-reaching consequences for Russia. If Iran becomes consumed by war, and if its capacity to act as a regional balancer wanes, Russia faces a sequential attrition of strategic depth. The wider geopolitical architecture could shift from a multipolar balance where Moscow plays off rivals against each other to a more fragmented environment in which Russia is reactive rather than proactive, the think tank says. In other words, Putin will see whatever influence he once wielded in the Middle East and the Gulf region completely disappear. It's happening already, as the only hope that Putin has in Iran is if the US chooses not to go quite so far as to get rid of all semblances of the country's regime. That's reactive versus proactive right there. All that Putin can do now is rely on another country to do what he hopes it will do. Russia has no influence here, despite all of the investment and supposed partnerships that it created with Iran. Sticking with partnerships, Paul Warburg highlights how the Iran war is also having an unexpected side effect on the one strategy that Putin has working in Ukraine, launching massive swarms of Shahid drones against Ukraine's cities and infrastructure. We know that Russia has been receiving Shahid drones from Iran since the beginning of the Ukraine war, and that it has since set up facilities to mostly build those drones without Iran's involvement. We say mostly because there is something about the arrangement that many don't know, but that Warburg exposes. There is a good reason to believe that a lot of the most critical parts of these drones still originate in Iran, Warburg explains, adding, "Which means that as Iran is taken off the board, Russia's Shahid drones will also be taken off the board. Because if they can produce 90% of it themselves, but they're still missing that 10% of key components, the drones that they can make are effectively worthless." Russia can't afford for its Shahids to become worthless, as Putin's entire strategy relies on them right now. We can see that in the numbers. According to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, Russia has launched 57,000 Shahid or Shahid-type drones at Ukraine since Putin launched his invasion. The sheer scale of these Shahid strikes has been rising since mid-2025. In January alone, Russia reportedly launched 4,400 Shahid-type drones at Ukraine, which averages out to about 140 per day. Sometimes the swarms that Russia unleashes contain as many as 700 drones, with Putin's goal typically being to cause damage where he can, but also to use these massive swarms to confuse Ukraine's air defenses enough so that Russia's far more damaging missiles can break through. Throw some resource wastage into the mix as Ukraine has to expend missiles and intercept the drones to stop the Shahids, and Iran's drone has become a means that Putin uses to bleed Ukraine dry. All of that might be gone now that the Iranian regime has collapsed, and if the US gets its way and President Donald Trump is able to install a leader that he's happy with, the Shahids may never be coming back. Russia will be feeling this right now, especially as Iran is having to focus on building its own Shahid drones to deal with Operation Epic Fury. The stockpiles of Russian Shahids will only last so long before Russia is going to need more of the components that it can only get from Iran. As Warburg points out, this may eventually mean that the massive swarms of drones Russia uses right now have to be cut back, which relieves pressure on Ukraine's air defenses and prevents Russia from causing damage that enables progress on the ground. What we have here is Russia's only truly effective military strategy being undermined. Russia is desperately trying to cling to some positives, as we'll get to at the end of the video, but there's another aspect of the geopolitical game that Putin is feeling slip through his fingers. As the loss of Iran exposes the weakened state of Russia's weapons production industry, Ukraine is positioning itself as such a world leader on the drone front that the Iran war has become an opportunity for Zelensky to deepen Ukraine's ties with the US. The tables are being turned here. Russia was already dealing with the fact that its share of the global arms export market had collapsed to 6.8% by 2025, compared to the 21% that it was between 2016 and 20. Now the Iran war is allowing Ukraine to position itself as a better choice, not only for the US, but for the other nations that bought from Russia and then saw the weapons they were sold completely fail in the face of America's firepower. How is this happening? On March 6th, Politico reported that Zelensky made the clever move to offer the US and Gulf countries that Iran has targeted with missiles and drones a sort of advisory service. The US specifically was engaged in talks that could see Ukraine share some of its drone tech, enabling America to move away from using expensive missiles to tackle Iran's Shahids and toward the far cheaper methods that Ukraine has developed during 4 years of fighting against Russia. According to the BBC, teams of drone experts from Ukraine have already been sent to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. Ukraine says that a total of 11 countries, including the US, have asked for its help in this department, which will sting Putin badly. Russia was supposed to be the country that other nations relied on for weapons. Now it's Ukraine, and the drone strategies that Ukraine is delivering are proven to work by the very country that is delivering. If we're talking influence, particularly in the Middle East, Putin has been hit with the double whammy of losing his influence while Ukraine's grows. And if the US and Ukraine are now building stronger ties, we may start to see a little more quid pro quo at play. Ukraine provides drones and its expertise to the US. Just maybe the US starts providing more of what Ukraine needs, such as air defense missiles, directly in return, rather than having Ukraine jump through hoops to get them. Or the US gives Ukraine permission to use ATACMS missiles in more strikes against Russia than it currently does. There's a certain amount of political gamesmanship going on here, and Putin has to accept that none of it is in his control, like so much of what Operation Epic Fury has caused. Still, Russia is trying to cling to the positives. As Warburg notes, some claim that the US is burning through its stockpiles in Iran, making it less of a threat to Russia in the future. Fortune notes that some in the US are also pointing out the Trump administration is using stockpiles of weapons that it claimed were already diminishing as a reason to not send those weapons to Ukraine. This is a valid point, though it overlooks the fact that these weapons have proven more effective in about 2 weeks of fighting in Iran than almost anything that Russia has done in 4 years in Ukraine. Stockpiles may become an issue, yes, but it's not like Russia has infinite weapons after burning through so much of what it had in Ukraine either. There's also the money side of things, as Iran has been exercising its only piece of leverage by closing the Strait of Hormuz. Oil prices have risen accordingly, which is good news for Putin and his shadow fleet that sells Russia's sanctioned oil. But even that isn't as big a boon for Russia as Putin would hope. As Warburg notes, what we're seeing here is short-term, and it's not like the Strait of Hormuz will be closed forever. As Iran gets even weaker, its hold over the strait will falter. That, combined with insurance leveling out and protection being offered to commercial vessels, as France has claimed that it will provide through a new defensive mission it's preparing with its allies, means that any economic benefit Russia experiences will be short-lived. Putin is grasping at straws if he thinks that these two conditional positives outweigh all of the negatives that come with what the US is doing in Iran. Shahi production is going to falter with Iran's regime crippled. Russia has lost its position as a geopolitical influencer, especially as its weapons and the Kremlin itself have failed to protect Iran. As for Putin, he's seen the US and Israel take out two of Iran's leaders already. America's overwhelming air power, vast intelligence network, and advanced bunker-busting missiles could do the same to him. All the while, Ukraine is building influence and strengthening ties, which weakens Putin further. A bunker buster may not come crashing down into one of Putin's palaces, but even if that doesn't happen, Putin knows that he's next. He may die, he may not, but he certainly faces a future where his geopolitical voice is as close to being silenced as it ever has been. We saw so much of this coming in January when protests erupted in Iran and the US started threatening the country's ruling regime. We said back then this would end up being very bad for Putin, and you can find out why we thought so if you check out our video. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to The Military Show to see more analysis of how the Iran war affects far more than Tehran's regime. And thank you as always for watching.